Welcome back to Transport Fever 2. If you're wondering what on earth I'm up to in this weird map that I'm starting to create, stay tuned and I will explain everything. I'm going to explore the concept of a linear end-to-end route. I'm going to compress that into a small space as if it was like a model railway in your back bedroom to avoid basically using too large a map. Because what happened on season 1, I overextended myself, used a megalomaniac super large map, and my computer basically collapsed before I could get maybe 20% of the way in. This linear route will have lots of destinations along the way. The concept is 1983 in the UK, so this means lots of very interesting trains quite close to my heart. Class 43, high-speed trains, lots of lovely Class 37s, lots of thrash and clag, some 73s, some 50s, and also some interesting EMUs. And what we're going to do, I started off thinking, well, let's avoid a megalomaniac map this time. Let's go very large and basically come up with a rough layout. And I'll take you through this. Ingleborough is the main terminal at the start of the map. We could assume that this is something similar to London. And we have basically a linear route that runs along this big U-shaped layout, going through lots of little stations along the way, through lots of different types of landscape and different zones. Just to touch on height map terminology for a second, if you're not familiar with how to make height maps or how they work in Transport Fever, 0% or pure black is the lowest level in your scale. As the colours in grayscale go lighter to white, white is the highest level in your scale. So what that means is if you've got a height map with a river valley, the dark area is the lowest point, the white area is the highest point, and you get your slopes and your hills between the two. The white can be any maximum height that you want. Similarly, the black could be any minimum lowest height that you want. Little section of a hill, black being the lowest point, white being the highest point, the flat point at the top. It could be like that. It could be like that. You decide on the scale. So what we're going to do is make a slightly raised area where the route is going to take place. I'll have a water area at the far end to represent the sea, and we'll have a baseline area in the center. So basically using the height map importing on Transport Fever, this is what we end up with. And the orange lines just highlighting the change on that corner. So we've got basically a flat slope. We've got the water at the end, which is black, and then we have this neutral area in the center. So a few questions. Is this area wide enough, or is it too wide to create this layout? And is the water area wide enough, or is it too narrow? So it's difficult to judge if this is wide enough without actually dropping in some objects. So this is what a 24 platform terminal station with a rough throat going to 8 tracks looks like. I would suggest that's actually too wide. Could be half the width. The next question about the water, I think that's sufficient water depth to create the impression of a port at the far end, but this is still too deep. So we reduce the base areas in width and keep the water depth at the far end. This feels a bit more comfortable, and we won't have to fill this too much with other assets. Maybe it's still too wide. Depends on which zone that we're going to be constructing. This width is quite good because you can get a lot of variety of tracks crossing over each other, curves happening without there being too much of a problem. We can always cut out what we don't need. This can just become a neutral area and we just pretend it's not there. So in terms of the run-in area and the backstage area, what can we do to actually hide it? This is the front of house with our run-in tracks. This could be a backstage area where we're staging trains. Maybe a line of trees is enough to hide it, to be honest. We can just pretend there's nothing behind there. Maybe this is all we need. I'm actually going to make the backstage areas black using the Marking Textures mod by Mad Hatter. Very useful. And this just kind of fades it out so you can't really see anything. Nothing is happening there. Nothing to see here. As long as we keep the backstage assets tight to the edges, then we won't really see them. So how do rivers look cutting across this landscape? How are we going to get this to work? I think it looks fine. The impression that the river carries on into the beyond. We use enough make-believe, we can just pretend. The other bank on the other end of the U shape is so far away that it's outside of the draw distance anyway, so it doesn't exist. Next question, is this sufficient length to create the plan that I'm trying to come up with here? We drop the location of these stations onto the real world areas on the layout, and I've created these little nodules that represent the approximate station locations. So when we bring the height map into Transport Fever, we've got some ideas of where these towns and these cities would be. So we can test then, for each station, does this feel like enough length between each station? I placed the notches pretty much equally along this layout, but in reality the spacing is going to be different between different towns and different cities. If you take Waterloo and Vauxhall in London, for example, these stations are very close to each other. If you go further out of London, take Farnborough Station and Fleet Station, they're further apart, so you do need a bit of variable spacing. We can take out Brockmere, we can take out Amberley, we can take out Greenstead, just to give us enough space, enough realism between these notches, these towns, these stations. The other side of the map, it's a little bit sparser. I think the spacing's probably okay. And on the end, where we've got our port and our industrial areas, I feel the spacing's okay there as well. I'd like to make it somewhat hilly, but I'm kind of interested in what's the limit. So I've created some standard height tests. So these aren't blended together, so they are stepped. They are essentially varying step lengths. So this is shallower, this is steeper. The shallowest set of steps that I created is too steep. The railway lines can't actually make it up and end up having to go into a tunnel. So we can stretch them out, make some much shallower options. And then we can see these shallow step options are actually obtainable. The railway will make up that sort of slope. So we have an idea in relation to the scale of this map, how much is too steep and how much is just right for a slope. In terms of the terrain that I'm trying to create in this series, Ingleborough at the very end, 24 platform terminal station, elevated throat, lots of arches, lots of viaducts. We're looking at something similar to central London. It could be a similar situation to Waterloo, to Charing Cross, to Victoria. Elevated tracks going through a dense city. So again, using Vauxhall as an example, this is the kind of aesthetic I'd like to sort of aim for. Then tracks go and split off in all sorts of directions. Something like Clapham Junction. It's perfect for that start of suburbia, where the big city lines start to spread out and go off into different mainline directions. And then we have the suburbs. Things start to get a little quieter, a little less dense. And then the villages, where it's even quieter, much calmer, much tamer. And then maybe we start to build up again into a regional town, something like Reading, a little quite far out from the capital city, but lots of converging lines, all combining again. And then something really interesting at the end, like a port. So take the example of Southampton, something like this could be really interesting to try and emulate. And then the heavy industry end. So places like Redcar up in Middlesbrough, fascinating. Lots and lots of heavy industry in the mid-80s, all starting to go a bit downhill and go out of business, but fascinating to try and emulate this. And then things like the coast and the cliffs of England. This is Dawlish, wonderful route to go down in reality. And then we can start looking at things like the industrial Midlands, places like Derby, lots of complex tracks, lots of complex industry happening, different lines converging. Then we can look at things like coal mines, further into the hills, so like the West Coast mainline in England, all very interesting. Lots of options for nice dramatic scenery. And then finally, we'll end in a terminal station in the north. I've called it Jorvikstead, so basically it could be based on York or somewhere like that. Once I'd run this through, I'm starting to get cold feet a bit about the size. I'm still using a very large map at this point, and I'm just a little worried that I'm not actually going to be able to complete it again because my computer's going to disintegrate. So I thought, let's try this on a medium map instead. Maybe it'll be okay. So remember our layout. It's a U shape. It's a linear route, lots of destinations along the way. It's not very long on the medium map. That only gives us 53 kilometers of that orange line. That's not really very far. The other problem is the transitions from the city to the suburbs to the port to the hills would be quite unrealistic. Things would be fading out quite quickly. So the cities wouldn't actually be that big because they would have to get suburban very quickly. The suburbs wouldn't be very big because they'd have to get into the countryside very quickly to fit into this length. So I'm going to create discrete zones. What this means is this might be the major city. This might be the inner suburbs. There's no transition between them. There's no blending. We exit the big city in a tunnel and we re-emerge in the suburbs. So we can focus on the design of these zones without having to worry about how they blend together. Example zone, we start maybe in zone 1 and we loop back. So we are tripling the length of track by adding tiers within each zone. This gives us 137 kilometers of main line if each zone was to have 3 tiers. Because each zone is distinct, it doesn't have to actually be 137. We could say it's 500 kilometers, because what goes on between the zones could be infinitely long, as far as we want it to be. So this is how it would look in the height map. 3 tiers, and we separate the tiers with neutral blocks. That's the height range I've used, and that's what it looks like. Painted the areas which we're not using in the black marker. So this will be zone 1, this will be zone 2. Areas between we can use for staging tracks and for tunnels. That's the sort of scale that we'd end up with. A terminal station, tracks running along tier 1, returning for tier 2, returning for tier 3. So we've got all this length of track to play with for the inner city and for all the other zones. We connect the tiers at each end using staging track that has no speed loss on the curves. So if trains are entering a high speed at this point, they don't lose speed and they re-enter the map at the correct speed. At the end of tier 3, or whichever is the end of the run, the tracks continue on to the next zone. Staging tracks, or areas where we are storing trains, can be at the back stage areas. And that's a preview of a little class 43 that we'll have running on this layout eventually. So I've created some ideas for how zone 1 and zone 2 initially will look. What's happening in zone 1? We have Ingleborough, which is the main terminal station at the very start of the map. This has 27 platforms. This is made up of platforms that serve local and regional trains in green, high-speed trains in the purple, another set of local and regional trains, and we'll have some platforms for the travelling post office Royal Mail services as part of this station as well. These platforms go into a 8-track throat with some crossovers. The main crossover, the Norvale crossover. These tracks go, we have slow and fast main lines. Goes to Oakfields station. High-speed trains don't stop at Oakfields. It's just local trains that stop here. The tracks continue through Croftbank Junction, where we get to Windmill Grove Junction station. And then this is where the tracks diverge at the end of zone 1. We have 8 tracks continue, 2 sets of high-speed lines, 2 sets of local and regional lines, and we have high-speed and regional local lines depart on Strathmore Junction. At Briarswood Junction, we have local and high-speed trains depart in a different direction. So we have a 3-way split at this point. So I went ahead and I started building into the first zone, and it was starting to be quite interesting. And there's a lot of tracks looping back for the 3 tiers. This was all very good, but it did start to get a little bit slow again. Still needed a lot of assets to fill in all the gaps. Got all these areas I'm just going to have to come up with buildings and houses and interesting things that sort of sit alongside what I really want to get into, which is the railways. And the problem in season 1 is I had miles and miles and miles of landscape that I was trying to sort of detail and sort out, but I just want to play trains, really. So too wide, too dense, all for the sake of creating length. The apparent length can be falsified with these offstage transitions. So this idea of looping back, maybe not the best thing. So why don't I just cut out what I don't need to tell the story? I want this big terminal station. I want high-speed trains, regional trains, local trains departing from these 24 platforms and going down into the country through various different towns, industries, environments, landscapes. Let's not bother with anything that doesn't focus on that. So I'm going to go back to this layout, but I'm going to break the straightness and the grid. We don't need to be straight. Tracks want to be curvy. We want to loop through different hillsides and go under hills and around rivers, and we want to be a bit more interesting. So why need to be straight? But the other aspect of this, I don't want to necessarily pre-plan that I'm going to have a curve here or a curve there. Even though this could end up as 200 kilometers, this is really just a starting point. This is going to be the map. And this is the map that I'm going to start with, and we're just going to grow it and develop from here. So we will start looking at the station in Ingleborough, and I'm going to use a standard station just to set this up to begin with. One track, 240 meters, standard track. And the reason I'm doing this as one platform is because I am going to completely amend everything that is in this station by altering all of the modules. Anyway, so we'll dive in and to configure the station. Let's turn the icons off. Basically, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 track modules for the first 6 platforms. We'll delete these tracks. And we're going to use third rail tracks. Let's use 25 mile an hour standard tracks. So there's the 5 tracks 1 and 2 for platform 1 and 2. Let's delete these. And the platform building. Go to platforms. We'll use the platforms with all the assets. And these are great because you get the ramp at the end. I'm going to repeat this so this is platform 1 and 2. I'm going to repeat this for 3, 4, 5, and 6. There we go. That's platforms 1 to 6. For 7 to 16, we're going to have longer platforms for the high-speed trains. And we're still going to have third rail tracks. We will just extend them out. An extra platform module. Platform modules are 40 meters. In terms of platforms, I'm going to use some slightly different platforms, just as if maybe these platforms had been redeveloped and extended when a high-speed train started running, just to have that slight difference and a slight variation. Just adds to it slightly. I'll carry on developing the rest of the high-speed train tracks. So that's up to platform 15 and 16. Just need to make sure that we've got that one in as well. Platform 7 is also high-speed train. That needs to be long enough. And we'll now have a look at platform 17 to 25, which will be shorter tracks, and we'll make those 5 modules as well. So again, third rail tracks, low speed, just as far as here. There we go. That's the rest of the local and regional tracks. We've got the 3 tracks that go towards the cargo platforms for the Royal Mail travelling post office trains, which I'm going to use as passenger platforms, because I basically just want a basic, simple, empty platform, and don't actually have any of those that are actually for cargo, but we're just going to cheat anyway in this map. Doesn't actually matter. It's just all about running the trains. There we go. Those are the main platforms set up. And we'll have a look at the station building next. I'm going to use a very basic 1980s station building, as if the Victorian station original maybe been demolished by this point. So this is all very sleek and modern for 1983. We're going to put some additional buildings alongside. We'll have a look at the station roofs. What options do we have? basically for the high-speed tracks, like nice big generous spans. This is maybe the mainline roofs which have been added. Part of the original station. What I don't like is how that's not keeping the same line. Let's not do it. Let's have a little portion out in the weather. It's quite typical. And then we will join up these platforms with the roof. Then what we're going to do over on this side, we're going to have a Euston style sort of industrial roof where the Royal Mail depot end is. That's quite nice. I'm quite happy with that. Let's have a look at some of the surrounding buildings at this end. That's not bad. We've got a few of the stock buildings. We've got a modded pub, some modded apartments, creating sort of Londonish density. Going to put some much taller buildings dotted around these as well. Got the road system because I want to use modded sort of London style buses and taxis driving around this part of the map as well. Let's come along, a little bit more height, good bit of 80s postmodernism happening in the city. Working on getting a bit of height at the back. This is looking convincing. No need to comment and let me know that none of these buildings actually exist in London, because of course this is Ingleborough in Anglia. It's not London in England. So, you know, I'm just making it up. So to me, this is a really good city centre terminus in 1983. Mix of decent 80s and sort of modernist architecture that could represent a city a little bit like London, except it's not London, it's Ingleborough in Anglia. So I think this is a really good end. Just needs a bit of painting, a little bit more detailing. So what we're going to create is some actual generation of people using these mods that curate a certain amount of residential people. Just have a no building, but we'll have a road connection. And what that means is at this point 200 residential people are going to be created, and we will do that in a couple of places where we've got some room with the roads, because we don't have actual cities or functioning towns in the way that the game is designed for. This will create people and vehicles. People will start to occupy, and as soon as we've got some industrial and commercial places for them to go, they will try and head there in their vehicles. I quite like this, and this is running a lot smoother than the previous iteration I tried. So far, so good. Let's see how this works out. So we're going to need to build station throat. So these 26 platforms are going to go into a total of 8 tracks, and they're going to bend in this direction. So we need to extend the landscape, curate that. So I'm going to bend this in this direction, maintaining this height. If you watch the intro, we are just curating the land that we need. Everything else is off stage. It's all about the railway. It's all about train operations with just enough in terms of assets to set the scene of what's going on. We'll just smooth this out a little bit. Okay. And we'll give that a paint as well. That's not that green. That green. just our base color. Make sure we don't paint the slopes. I'm going to be doing this a lot, depending on the design and exactly where I want to take the railway. No pre-planning of where the route is going to be, just an idea of the schematic of the route. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to pull this out again anyway. Doesn't need to be neat. Okay, so using our, let's go up to 40 for these tracks, third rail standards. We know that the platform 1718 on these tracks is going to be one of the tracks that continues. So this is going to pull out. We could even say by that much, get a real curve on it. We know that their crossover, called the Norvale crossover, is going to go all the way to the end at platform 1 and 2. So if I extend platforms 1 to 6 outwards, this gives us enough space to get crossovers in, and that will be roughly where the Norvale crossover connects. So what we'll do is we'll get the remaining 6 tracks to come out. So we'll have 8 tracks continuing. So we'll rough these in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are high speed on the end, high speed on the end, then a mix of local and regional on the inside. We'll pull these through and then start to split them out to their respective platforms. These are doing that weird S-bend thing again. So let's pull those back and run it from here. That's better. Okay, so the Norvale crossover is going to run from this position all the way to those tracks. I don't think this leaves us necessarily enough space to get the rest of the functions that we need to get in. I'm going to pull these tracks out a little further before we do that. Let's try that again. That looks more comfortable. The problem I've got here is that I need double slip switches on all the tracks. The angle is going too obtuse at this point. It needs to be quite acute for these double switches work. So we do actually need to go in closer. Otherwise the crossover is kind of useless. It does need to go back to about that point. So let's test that again. Oh, perfect. It just fails on the last one. Otherwise all the double slips are working fine. So it just needs to go back a little narrower than that. So I wasn't too far off when I estimated this. Just about there. Try that now. Still not good. It's about half that, I reckon. Something like that. If this doesn't work, then we will actually go back to all the way back to where I thought. Perfect. So we have a double slip switch. We want all of these to be yes, because the point of this crossover is that we can switch all of the tracks across. Interestingly, we're just missing those two now. Let's see what we can do here. So what you've got to be mindful of is that you are not turning back. You don't curve back that way. You keep straight as you can. You can't do ignore collision tracks because it does have to blend with those. Needs to want to do it. See, that's perfect. It's just going to be very tight over here. But if that's the sort of layout that we're trying to create, this is what we're going to have to do. Just need to avoid these S-bends. So this is perfect because double slips all the way. It's just going to be that tight. So there's a Norville crossover. These tracks will immediately join. Per the diagram. Then these tracks will immediately join. And then the first of the high-speed tracks will join as well. But what we have in our diagram is a connection between these and a connection between these. We make these double switch, then we don't need crossovers to start the platforms, because we can use these to change tracks. Another crossover here. With double slips. And then these high-speed tracks start to turn in this direction. I think what we'll do is we'll have some side-ins on the end. Not part of the diagram, it just makes that a little more comfortable visually. So just after big Norville crossover, we have our tracks that go to TPO, the Royal Mail section. These tracks join in, like so. Just always checking that we're avoiding those nasty S-bends. We'll bring these tracks out fairly straight, then pull off the junction. Again, just need to avoid the weird curve. Not like it. The only thing we don't have very effectively is any way of these tracks crossing over to those. So that's going to be all down to the train planning. Local trains on this side, we're going to have to cross over. Doubt it's going to let us do this. No, we need to do that further down. At the moment, these are the high-speed tracks on the outer edge. The local are on the inside, high-speed on the left. But we need to get switch to those there. And further down the throat, we will enable these to get over into the middle tracks as well. Just conclude those side-ins. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pull back where we don't need the terrain. No point just pointlessly filling in assets where I don't need them to tell the story. If we need to pull it back out, then of course we will. At this point, I'd like to have a bridge over a river. So I'm just gonna pull the terrain out a little bit more. A little bit smoother. Gosh, which grass are we? That's the one. There we go, found water. Make it fairly wide. I think something like that would be good. Just need to smooth these edges off a little bit. Get it look less crunchy. Okay, not bad. Let's go up to 50 on the bridge. And what I'm wondering if we can do to actually climb subtly so that we can start to get some viaducts on this side. Like so. That's quite nice. And the raised height is quite subtle, I think. So that's good. So Norvale East crossover can actually be on the bridge. And that's going to come from the right hand side tracks all the way to the left. Only problem is that's messing my bridge up. Yeah, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll keep that off the bridge. Good lord. I mean, come on. I have to do the whole thing again. It's just completely disintegrated now. Alright, I'll just do it. I'll just do it again. Okay, so no switches on the bridge. Let's not do that again. Alright, let's continue with our land a little bit further down. I like the way this curve is going. I might start curving back this way, I think. Like the fuzzy edges, they're good. I just need to make it a smidge lower. That should work. course, just above. That's it. That's what I want. Okay, I was hoping the slope threshold would stop it bleeding off the edges. Just gonna have to be a bit neater about it. Not sure this is gonna work yet. Right, so level tracks with an invisible bridge. It's it can be really frustrating why these tracks don't want to be parallel. And then suddenly they do. Okay. This is looking like an absolute mess. You have to come up with something to mask that. Again, as with so many other things, if you just do it second time, then maybe it's alright. They just want to be deleted and redone, that's all. Well, we persevere. Right. So, Viaducts. This nice mod that we're going to use. Just check the height. I think we're at 8 is fine. It's going to be stepping though because it's... Oh, no, I didn't flatten the track. Bear with me. That's better. So, this should run quite smoothly now. I'm hoping. This one's not working very well. Had better results on the straight. That could be the problem we've got. And it's stepping because of the curves. I don't mind it. I think the transition between the hill and the flat piece might be causing the problems. There is an alternative, which is to use these brick arches. Maybe I could do a little run. Maybe that's enough. Let's see if I can get this junction working. It's not liking it that way. And oh my gosh, it really does not want to be done on bridge pieces. And it's just colliding all over the place. I think I'm out of luck here. I think I'm going to do this bit as an embankment, do my junction, and then I'll have a bit of flat, straight viaduct. Just can't have it every way you want. You just got to pick flat embankment. Just going to put some buildings next to it, I think. Just clip some buildings into it. Or to avoid that embankment altogether. that'll just be the height of the ground. Might as well just give in. And then once we merge on the straight, then we'll have the ground lower. So take out to about that point. Right, can I have a crossover junction now, please? Please. Here we go. Are we having double switches though? No. Well, we don't need them there, do we? Because that's where we need them. Perfect. Awesome. Right, so we will then drop the terrain. Maybe a smidge more. Yeah, that's okay. So straight, level. Is that an optical illusion? Because that's saying that's flat. But that's definitely dropping. Also, it's not high enough to actually force a bridge. So I need to drop it a little bit. Just a smidge more. No, not smooth. The amount of times I've hit that smooth tool by mistake. Gonna be getting water in a minute if we do go too much further. That's it. Bridge, flat, straight. Right, now. So 12 high. 10, 12, 14, 12. God, it's still on the wog. When's flat track ever actually flat? Now, okay. Now it is. I get it. It's the transitions between the slopes and the flat bits. Ugh, to be honest, I'm going to be here all day otherwise. So I just wanted some viaduct and some arches. Not too much to ask. That's all right. Right. So that height, sort of that much to begin with. We'll see what sort of buildings we put next to it. I think I'd like the station to be about here. Yeah, that feels about right. Yeah, feels like a good height. I'm not going to attempt to do an elevated station. I'm sure there's a good mod out there, but it's just not going to do what I want it to do with the modules. Unless you know something different. I think I've got all of the mods. Many mods I haven't got. Need to do some terrain painting. Something like that. pull this out a little bit. So this is going to be within its own little cluster of taller buildings. It's going to get a little less dense this side of the river particularly. We'll carry on the height a bit towards the river edge. I'll finish my arches in a minute. I just want to find out from if I build a quick depot, make sure that my electric multiple units, the 421s, 81 meters, so that's 2 platform modules. I'll do them in 8 coaches, so that's basically just under 4 platform modules. Might be a situation like Clapham Junction where you can't actually get out the last doors of the last carriage, so I'll do 4. Thought that would be the case, so let's just double check. That's the sort of station I'm looking for. 160. Blue. So this is Oakfields. I'm actually going to have to pull this down a bit further because I'm going to have to spread the tracks out to make a short little throat, so that wouldn't have been enough. It needs to be further down, somewhere down here. So we'll have 50-mile-an-hour track. We are going to speed up eventually. So that's the length of 4. I don't mind if that's slightly different. It could be the one place that's got the canopy as well. So I'll fill these in. The reason I've done no platform on this end is that basically the 2 outer tracks are going to be the high-speed tracks that don't stop. Maybe there's an occasional reason why they would there. Oh. No, I've missed the platform. I do need another set of platforms here. It's been way too clever there. Alright. Non-stopping. These 4 are stopping. It's these 2 that aren't technically stopping. So we'll just leave the outer track. There you go. That's more like it. Just try not to mix and match too many different mods. And this is the blue trim GWR style. Ingleborough in the background, looking good. This will be Oakfields. This will be the little throat and should work fine. No crossovers or switches. At this point, just see if we can reduce weirdness of these curves a bit. It does feel a bit abrupt. These tracks are splitting, then we can't have any gaps between them, so they can't be bridges. Otherwise we'll see hollow gaps. That's it. So a short little run of Viaduct. That's alright, it's better than nothing. That feels a lot more natural, a lot less forced. Okay, let's see if we can get a road through. I'm basically going to see if I can Not with these buildings, obviously. I've got a few buildings thick enough, again, not these buildings, that I could just hide the terrain transition. Just not that one. Tower 42 is probably a bit overkill. Ooh, it's starting to get a little busy. Okay, we need to put some more building assets in. Give ourselves the opportunity to get a road connection to Oakfields as well. So I guess the look I'm going for is to have a cluster of taller buildings around Oakfields and have it, as I said, a little quieter, a little less dense over in this area. Might have a tube track emerge out of a tunnel at this level. I'm trying to do, just trying to get it a little flatter, a little straighter on that edge. Ingleborough terminal. We've developed a few more buildings, a few more streets alongside. We've got a nice old stone arch bridge across the river. So I'm quite happy with that. I've got some quite aggressive LOD controlling mods to try and reduce the level of detail as we're zoomed out. I guess if you've got a decent computer, which I don't, then you might have a bit more detail showing at this sort of level of zoom. We're going to carry on and add some more buildings in the area between Ingleborough and Oakfields. Going to be a bit more of a low-key vibe than the heavy commercial finance sort of side of things going on around Ingleborough. So we'll see what sort of assets we have in store for that. This is giving me the sort of vibe I'm looking for, a little less dense than Ingleborough. So we're starting to pare down a little bit, but still central to the city. Very dense up against the tracks, so very much like Vauxhall in South London. Very noisy, quite unpleasant place to live, to be honest. At least it's electrified, not steam or diesel anymore at this point. So this gives our archers a little bit of an accompaniment, and our road is continuous, so we will have traffic running from our people generators that we set up at the far end, so we should get some traffic running all the way along to Oakfields. Just this final bit to do. What I'm going to do, just to break up the architecture a little sec, is have a look at some signaling. To enable us to have platform options for the trains that are coming into Ingleborough, the last signals coming into the station to enable us to have platform options in the lines is the point where the decision is made. So we can't have any signals heading in this direction until we are this side of the crossover. So this must be our last set of signals running in that direction. This is a shame, but this is how Transport Fever works. If we had further signals, then that's the position point for the decision making on the platforms. I want the decisions to be made at this point. So we're going to give that a go. If it becomes incredibly slow, then we're going to have to rethink how our platform segregation works. I think without really having to test it, I imagine that's going to be a little difficult. But you saw what happened when we tried to get crossovers on the bridge. So this is where I'm going to build the last set of signals heading in. So I'm going to get some signal gantries. Trains are going in on the left on all of these tracks. So I think we need mid-span reverse at this point. Nope, just the mid-span. Just trying to get these lined up. Ooh, it's not perfect, but you know what? I don't think I'm going to do full gantry all the way over. As part of that, it feels a bit chaotic. And also, again, the hitboxes are trying to delete these things. Okay, the problem again is me, and it's trying to do it on a curve. So once attempted on the straight, it'll work perfectly. As I will demonstrate. No. No, this is not happening. So I'm going to have signals with the feathers. Obviously they're non-functional in Transport Fever because there's no logic for train routing. Well, there is, because that's how it works, but it's not available in the API for modders to use it in the signals. So we're going to set that signal up there. And what this represents is if you were going straight ahead, you'd get a green. If you're going off to the right, you'd get a green and a feather. Same in this location. And the same further up in this location. And indeed, exactly the same here. You're either going ahead on a green and no feather, or you're going right to join that track with the feather. There's no limit on signals coming the other way. What that means is that trains exiting the station can stack up in various places. That allows trains entering to find a route in between the tracks which are actually open. So that is something at least. So we can start that signaling from all the way at Ingleborough. We'll have a combination of left and right hand feathers, just for that, where we can position them, just for that little bit of realism, just for show, of course. And this is showing that going straight ahead on green, or you're going to take the left double switch. In this case, not double switch, just a junction to go left on the feather. And we'll use this in combination with some standard 4-aspect signals, where we've got opportunities to do that. So this is a good place where we can hold trains in this location to route them whilst trains are coming in the other direction. We'll do those in a few of these locations. Don't want to make it too heavy with signaling. As long as they're all pointing in the right direction and we're not preventing the platform assignments to be amended in the other way. And we can carry on further down the tracks at the crossovers. Maybe at this point we could get some gantries in. Not everywhere, but just enough to add a little bit of depth, a little bit of realism. Oh, I've picked a spot that's Too far away from the points. That's nice. See if we can get a gantry across. Perfect. Obviously nice and straight at this point. Straight and level. Not bad. Close enough. And some more in this location as well. I've added a mod that darkens the track texture, as it was a little light, and this looks a bit more like you'd see in the UK. These sort of darker tones. I think that works quite well. Right, so we're going to get some taller buildings around Oakley, not Vauxhall, to try and have this little hub of taller towers before we get into the more inner city sort of suburban industrial areas. There's a starter for 10, some lovely residential blocks. Starting to come together a little bit. A mix of different eras and different sizes. It's an area that's definitely in change and transition. Probably post-industrial decline, starting to get a bit more development going on in the 80s. That's the height I was sort of looking for to develop this second cluster. Popped in a couple of tower cranes because we're going to have some development sites happening as well. It's the boom time before the recession hits in the 90s. Some paving textures, some sand textures. Drop a couple of trees and some fences in. Just a couple of sort of larger-ish town trees where we have some gaps. To soften it a little. Especially where we've got some rough edges around the place. Trees are always a great tool for masking the ugly corners and junctions. It's to be fair to say that I'm always going to view it from this side as well. So I'm kind of taking that into account. There can be a back edge. So I'm going to run along this side most of the time, I think. I think I had some excavators that I can use. Here we are, some wheel loaders. Maybe a couple of scrapers on the site as well. Okay. It's not perfect, but that'll do nicely for me. Of course we're going to come back and tweak things to our heart's desire. I think we will make sharpish turn back in this direction. I'm just going to set that up to do something like this. At this point, I'm going to set the tracks to 75. They'll be speed limited anyway because of the curves, but this is the point where the high-speed trains can start to knuckle down a bit, open the taps. Slightly weird curve there again. Build these out a little bit. See if I can fix that. Remembering that these two and these two are the high-speed train tracks. We will get them to join up again as we get further down. Okay, I think that's how far we're going to go in this episode. Thank you very much for joining me. And if you're joining me again after a long absence, thank you for your patience. When we come back, we are going to look at Windmill Grove Junction, which is where this main line splits into three. We will have a power station and we'll have lots of junctions and crossovers. So thank you for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.